Hello and welcome, everybody. Today is October 7th, 2025, and we're focused on a digital world town hall meeting. And we have a team from around the world, from Australia, from New Zealand, from representing the Mexican environment, the Canadian environment. I haven't checked if the Sweden guys are on, but and then also here in the US and many other parts of the world. We're grateful for your time, your attention to review some of the things that have transpired in the last week as far as progress or some of the details, and then also question it along the way and have a general council around thoughts, comments, feedback, and just make sure we're on the right path and that we're seeing things in many different perspectives. So we're grateful for those that are taking the time, as well as the hosts that are here with us. And we also want to recognize that there are multiple different elements and realms. So the spiritual realm, the digital realm, and the physical realm. As we work on helping to create the digital side of things, trying to understand spiritually what's true and correct. And I think, just inviting the spirit is important, no matter what religion, no matter what beliefs, no matter what understandings, that at least we understand we're here and we have some form of a creator, and we're grateful for the ability to assemble and then to stream. So this is, globally, and it'll be recorded, but I think a lot of that's it's really forgotten these days, and it's something that we need to not forget. So we're going to go ahead and start with an opening prayer from Wally, and we don't have the closing prayer assigned, so we'll just see how things pan out. And if someone would like to along the way, feel free to just volunteer. So Wally, if you would get us kicked off with a prayer, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Sure. Dear Father in heaven, we bow our heads in humility and gather our hearts and minds, reaching out with gratitude. We are thankful for the blessings of life, community, and the freedoms we hold dear. We acknowledge the beauty in our diversity and the strength that arises from our shared humanity from the many corners of the world. Our hearts go out to those affected by recent tragedies, including shootings and violence. We stand united in our request for healing and support for all those who are grieving and who are traumatized. Please comfort and embrace them and help them to find solace in the love that surrounds them, even in their darkest hours. We humbly ask for guidance as we navigate the challenges ahead. Protect our individual freedoms and our personal choices, allowing us to express our beliefs while fostering understanding and compassion between one another. Help us to embrace the core tenets of empathy and love, transcending the divisions that often seem unsurmountable. May we collectively champion the cause of adoption around centralized identity, empowering voices and choices in a way that respects the dignity of each individual. Let us work together to create a world where everyone's identity is honored and protected. We humbly pray for these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. I think that the world will look at centralized versus decentralized, and they may feel the same, but really the work of the digital world is all about how an individual can, from a decentralized standpoint, own their own identity and their own data. So it's this last week, at least the last 2 weeks, have been very telling. For those of you that have not seen it, there's a lot of perspectives around no ID and petitions that are going around primarily out of Europe. And it'll be interesting to see how the understanding of centralized versus decentralized can actually be realized. So with that being said, as a reminder, this is a private membership association. Some of the things we may talk about might be forward-looking. The things that we talk about and focus on is the opposite of centralized systems, which is really how can decentralized systems actually stop a lot of the secret combinations that are centralized. And some of them come in different forms in different ways. Some of them are private, some of them are public. Some of them use private systems to basically take over public systems. But we really believe that decentralized systems where the individual owns their own identity, and then certain things on top of it around transactions or payments, and then even storage and many other things. Some of the things that have transpired this last week are primarily massive advancements around guardianship and endorsements from governmental bodies that recognize that decentralization is the true and correct way, and walking away from the centralized systems. These are examples of the different chains, so to speak. We've got identity, transactions, storage, communications, assets, governance, reputation, and legacy. So when we look at that, really finding the balance between governance as the individual in the middle of it, people may say, well, what is decentralization? It's really simple. You get 12 words, you link it to you, who you are in a secure environment, and that basically becomes your identity. Now, one of the things that we've been able to make a lot of progress on this last week is a gentleman that's actually on this call today with us. His name is Kent, and he has a history with some of the technology that's actually been deployed, but he's also has an understanding and a desire and a couple different approaches, which the digital world has tried and started down a path around regenerating keys with your contacts. And I had an opportunity to meet with Kent face to face for almost a day this last week. And, we all in this environment understand the language of, you've got a master key, kind of like what we just looked at. So this is a master private key that then has derived keys that come off of it for lots of different things. Maybe it's your passwords, maybe it's applications, maybe it's data, maybe it's wallets, maybe it's health, maybe it's your search history. Maybe it's financial transactions and all of them. Maybe it's how you connect in with countries or courts or parents. But what happens if we lose those keys is one of the things that this individual is passionate about. And right out of the gate, I'd love to provide the time and the opportunity for him to introduce himself, and then to really talk about a possible solution to key management, not as in rotating keys, but as in you lose your keys. What happens if you lose your keys and you've put your world, all your assets, all your contacts, all your transactions, they physically are still there, but the representation of them digitally, and in some cases, like for instance, I have a lot of friends, they say that about 24% of all Bitcoin, so out of the 21 million that will actually be total, they're saying 21% is actually gone because of mostly mismanaged keys. So people forget how to actually get in. So with that being said, Ken, I don't know if you're live with us or not, but I'd like to talk a little bit about or provide a forum where you can actually walk through key management and your thoughts around that and potential solutions in the future, and to have the folks here shoot holes in it, question it, validate it. And as we kind of move forward, we do it in a sense of unity and oneness, even though there may be lots of external perspectives. Some people are very strict and say, no, keys should never be shared with anybody else. And you just need to be responsible and not lose them. And your whole world can actually get better, and you can own you instead of, a good example is you go into a bank and you get given a bank account number. Well, do you remember those digits? What if somebody else gets it? Well, what if the bank just chooses to shut it down? The goal is, if you're responsible and accountable, you can actually own your own identity. You just have to remember those 12 words. So Kent, if you're in a position to review some of your thoughts around how this could actually be solved, now's the time.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you loud and clear.
Great. Okay, nice to meet everybody. In case you haven't met me before, my name is Kent Bull. I'll go ahead and jump into the discussion, and there's actually a document that I could show to introduce the concept. Before I do, let me change my...
Why don't you share it with me? Just if it's a link or a doc, go ahead and share, and then I'll pop it up for you. That's okay.
Okay, let me just grab you a link really quickly. I'll go ahead and send that to you. So let's see. So basically what we're going to show is a diagram. And in that diagram, we have 3 participants. So like Michael just mentioned, when these keys that we use to control our life, these with decentralized identifiers, when they get lost, that can be a big problem. And to illustrate how large of a problem that can be, we could talk about Bitcoin. And you've probably heard of somebody who's lost their Bitcoin or somebody who's been worried about losing their Bitcoin. That's an example of a decentralized key management system where, unless you take special protections, when you lose your key, that's it. Now, Bitcoin does support multi-sig, and we can get into that in just a minute. It's similar to what you're going to see here. When you use any sort of a multi-sig or key sharding tool, like what I'm going to describe here, there is a risk. Whenever you allow somebody besides yourself to even have a part of your key or to have a backup key, they can impersonate you if they decide to betray you. That's always a risk that you have to take into account. And one thing that you find in security, it's always a matter of trade-offs and risk level. And if I wanted to really scare people, I could tell you how the current web security works. But what we're talking about here is what is called multi-signature identifiers. So I'll start with the top row there when we get into the diagram. Thanks for bringing this up, Michael. But first I want to mention the alternatives. So let's say you have your decentralized identifier. You're using that identifier to create multiple derived keys, and you're using the whole clear suite of applications, and it works really well for you, and you do a really good job of managing your keys. You have a password manager like 1Password or KeepPass, or there's a number of other different Passbolt, a number of different password managers that you can use. And if that's your skill set and you know how to manage passwords well, great, you'll probably never lose your password. I happen to use something called 1Password, and I've got a paper backup. That's one good way to manage passwords. Well, what happens if you're somebody that might not be your skill set, or you haven't been trained on that, and maybe you've got a bunch of students and they're all at the same party in a boat, and the boat sinks to the bottom of a swimming pool or a lake or something like that? That's going to happen, and it's going to happen in real life when we start to scale these systems. Oftentimes, early adopters are more responsible, they're more invested, and they're paying more attention because they're more excited about the benefits things stand to bring. And so oftentimes, early adopters do a better job than some of the later adopters when we get network effects or black swan events that make things go to the masses. And so what I'm going to show you here are some of the ways that we can manage that risk as we go to the masses. I'm just trying to introduce the problem here. And so now that I've introduced the problem, or Michael did, and I've sort of confirmed that, I can mention some of the approaches to try to solve the problem of losing the key. And just to sort of follow through on that Bitcoin thing, with Bitcoin, you lose your key. You've probably heard somebody, oh, there's this multi-$100 million wallet. Somebody set up a password to try to recover their key, and they've only got 2 attempts left. And if they don't get it right, $700 million goes to waste. And it's all just locked up in Bitcoin. That's a real thing. It actually happens on a regular basis. And so that's part of why the individual who invented Carry, Sam Smith, created things like multi-sig. He also created something called pre-rotation, which we won't get into today. That's another way you can try to address this problem. But the core thing is a simple problem that we're trying to solve today is, let's say your grandmother wants to use some sort of clear service or any decentralized identity service that supports this sort of multi-sig, and she wants to say, okay, I have a son and a daughter that I trust, and I trust them a lot. I don't believe they're going to betray me. I believe they're going to help me. And she says, I want to give you the ability to help me recover in case I lose my phone. Maybe I slip and fall and my phone hits the ground and it's never useful again. How would we approach that? Now, I will acknowledge the risk up front. That's who party 2 and party 3 are here. We'll say party 1 is the grandmother, party 2 is a son, party 3 is a daughter. The risk up front is that for each additional person that we add to this group, that's additional attack surface. They could either betray the other members of the group, or through, if they're not responsible, they could, that's another potential attack vector, but there are ways to limit that sort of risk through what are called thresholds. So if you scroll down just a little bit, Michael, then we'll scroll back up again. So these parties are actually part of what's called a multi-signature identifier. A multi-signature identifier that I have down here called main multisig. You'll just remember that's what's down here. The main multisig is your actual decentralized identifier. So that would be what you would use and say, this is what I'm giving everybody to say, this is me, my identifier, this is me. And then if you scroll back up to the 3 participants, I'll explain the relationship between the 2. So I've got it color coded here, I know the colors can be a bit much when you're starting out, so I'll go slow and I'll sort of talk you through this. The color coding is to sort of help anchor in the mental model of how each of these parties here helps the grandmother manage their identifier. So now let's just sort of dig into it. The way that at high level, to go very quickly, just to explain the mechanism, and then I'll pause and we can sort of ask questions and have a discussion. At a high level, grandma says, I want my key to be able to act independently, all on its own, so I don't need anybody else. And that's totally possible. And I happen to specialize in something called Carrie, something that Michael knows a lot about. And Carrie supports something called thresholds. And what that allows you to do is define a weight. And what we're getting into here is often called social key recovery. So grandma is going to get a weight of 1. And if your weight is 1 or above, you can essentially you can unlock the lock. Now what she's going to say to child 1, her son who's party 2 or child 1, she's going to say, I'm going to give you a weight of a half. And then to the daughter, she's going to say, I'm going to give you a weight of a half as well. So both of you have to work together. If I lose my access, you can both work together to rotate or change the next key. And what you can do is you can rotate out my old lost key and rotate in my new key. Now, the reason why that's possible is because the way that Carrie and some decentralized identity management systems do things is they allow you to have that identifier on the bottom that's your multi-signature identifier, and it's made up of all the participants. And so what that means is if one of the participants loses their key, as long as the thresholds are set up correctly, you can actually recover from a situation of lost keys. Now now that you sort of get the basic idea, I'll mention one more example, and then I will talk about the idea of a custodial threshold key recovery service. That's a mouthful we'll get into in a minute, but we'll talk about one more example. So let's say grandma says, well, you know what, I guess I don't really want to trust, let's call it, Bob is party 2 and Alice is party 3. She says, I like these, maybe grandmother was an heiress to a very large fortune. And she's like, well, I have a couple $100 million. And I don't know that I want to give any one of my grandchildren the burden of having to manage that, or any 2, because maybe 2 will collude. And so I want to make it so that 5 or 6 or 7 have to collude to sort of lock me out of my wealth before I sort of die and do my inheritance or whatever is connected to her decentralized identity. Well, you can extend this model and say, instead of just half of a weight for each of these 2 children, you could say, well, I'm going to give maybe I have 7 kids that I trust a lot. I'll give each of them 1/7. And then I have 2 kids that I trust a lot, and I'll give them a half of a weight. Or she could even give them, one of them, maybe her husband, if he's still alive, she can give him a 1 as well. So you can start to see some of the power here in defining these thresholds. They're called weighted thresholds, to be able to make all these participants able to function as somebody that's a group of people that controls the identifier on the bottom. And the color coding is the last thing we'll get into before I pause and sort of take questions before I get into the recovery service. So to go quickly through the color coding here, so let's start with the white. The white are the keys, and we'll go into the white, red, and yellow, and then sort of you can see how it continues for the rest of the colors. So when we make our identifier, we need to create, each person needs to create their own key. And then you'll see with this main multisig, what you're doing when you're creating the white key there, which I call the current signing key or keys, each person's white key is being submitted or grouped together in what's called your multi-signature identifier. And what that means is that grandmother, Alice, and Bob all have to submit a key in order to make that multi-signature identifier. And if they want to sign anything or unlock a lock, they all have to sign something with their individual participant. And let's say that they want to, they're worried somebody might have compromised a key or they lost a key. Well, now, or let's say they didn't even lose a key, but they're a little worried and they say, let's change our keys because somebody might have compromised it, or they just want to follow good security hygiene. They'll do what's called a key rotation. And so the first rotation, you go from the first column there with white and red to the next column with red and yellow. And what's going on? So the reason why there's in the first column, there's white and red is because when you create your identifier, you're saying, I'm showing the world that I have two kinds of keys. One are my signing keys, and one are my next pair of keys, my rotation keys that I'm going to use as my next signing keys. So everybody in the world can see a strong link between what your keys are right now and what your keys are going to be. I'm getting a little bit technical here, but what I'm trying to do, I won't go deeper than that. What I'm trying to do is show you that you can actually have an entire history here of your current key and what your next key is going to be. And that's what allows you to create the multi-signature identifier. And when you change keys, everyone changes, they go to the next key together. And so you'll go from your white keys to your red keys. And then let's say you want to change again in 3 months or 6 months or a year, then you'll go from you'll go from the red keys to the yellow keys. And when you go to your next keys, your rotation keys are automatically generated, and that's how carry works. And I'm going a little bit too deep here. I'm going to pause for questions. I'm just sort of showing that grandmother, Alice, and Bob can all work together to contribute to what's called a multi-signature identifier. And when they do that, they're actually using their own individual, what's called single signature identifier. And they're doing key rotations to stay secure. And if one party loses their key, then they're able to tell the other ones, as long as the thresholds are configured correctly. I want you guys to rotate to the next key pairs, and we'll rotate my old identifier out and the new identifier in. So I've taken a lot. I've talked a lot here. I actually want to pause. I know I'd love to hear what's going on in people's minds here and how what's coming across, what's not. And once we understand this concept, then I can discuss the key recovery service that Michael was mentioning that I'm so passionate about. But as I say this, so what questions are coming up with people's mind? Is this concept making sense? And if it's not making sense, feel free to tell me. I'm more than happy to.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Mariano.
I know it might be very technical and in depth. I'm an expert.
No.
I don't know when to stop.
I personally, I love it. All the technical part, because that's one of my biggest concerns. Because, for example, for the Mexican environment, not everybody or most of the people, they are not tech savvy. So in order for them to have the keys or the opportunities and to recover their identity, in some way that, because I don't know, we were discussing that the other day. Imagine if suddenly they only rely on this system and suddenly they just forgot their 12 words, what they can do, And I think that what you're proposing here right now is super powerful. And thank you very much. That's it.
Thanks, Mariano. Other thoughts or comments or feedback? So let me try and just say in a simple way, you know how we look at these 12 words that we get here, or in some case 24. So these words represent those keys. And if you lose the words or the key, all of the assets that you've put into the systems basically disappear with it. And what Kent is talking about is the ability to have either your friends or your family or your contacts help you to restore those keys by verifying who you are. So they validate who you are. And in so doing, maybe it's a scan, maybe it's a push, they basically can help you to rebuild your identity. And they can't do it on their own by themselves, but they may be able to collude together to do it. So there's some liability in that. But it could be a free service where people just share it with their contacts that they choose to help them rebuild their identity. That's what he's talking about right now. We're going to go into an additional recovery service that's kind of a paid third-party governance. That's what they do as a service, as a business, so to speak. They're a service provider to the digital world around those types of things. So does this make sense, what he's reviewing here? Thoughts or comments?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I'm just wondering, what are the risks? What are the risks involved besides people colluding together?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's the perfect question to start with. So as you can see, because you can define the thresholds however you like, what this allows you to do is it puts you in the driver's seat to be able to shape your thresholds to whatever your risk profile is, whatever threat level you're at. And you might say, I have people that I can trust. I've got my ride or die people. I can let a couple people into my key recovery group, my multi-sig identifier, and I can trust them. Or you might say, you know what? I happen to be somebody who doesn't have any kids. I don't know that I can trust anybody. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay professional services. Or you might be in a place in your life where there's not anybody that you want to trust or give that responsibility to yet. You can say, I want to pay a professional escrow agent or a professional key manager to keep a backup for me. And you might say, I don't want to trust any one corporation. Oh, this particular part of the diagram is showing some other advanced concepts. So maybe we'll come to this a little later if we have time. But basically you're saying what this capability allows you to do with multi-signature keys and with weighted thresholds is it allows you to say, how many people do I want to involve? And each person that you involve is a risk, but you can choose how much risk. So let's say I was in your recovery group. You could say, well, I only trust them about 10% or 5%, and you'll give that sort of a weight. And if you gave everybody 5% of a weight, then you need all 20 people to help you rebuild your identity, like Michael said. And that might be okay for you. You might be okay tracking down. Maybe you have a lot of assets to protect. You've got a high threat level. You might say, yes, I want 20 different people to have to collaborate to rebuild my identity. And half of those, or even 25 or 75% of those people or agents might be some professional recovery services that have an automated process. Some of them might not be. But essentially, it puts you in the driver's seat to choose that. And another way to think about this is let's talk about the forgot password flow. So we've all signed up for accounts. And if you forget your password, well, we were used to the idea we can go to the sign-in page, click forgot my password, and they'll send you an email. And then in that email, it usually gives you a timed use token to be able to recreate your identity. You could say in the context that we're using today, we use the word rebuild. So what you're doing is you're throwing your old key away, which is your password, and you're saying, I'm going to add a new key to control this same account. What we're talking about here with multi-sig is we're saying, okay, if we say your password is your key or your key is your password, then we're saying multiple people need to get essentially that sort of email, so to speak, to be able to say, yeah, we're all going to collaborate to give you access to your account back. But in this sense, it's not quite the same account as from the centralized model because it's your decentralized identity that you fully control.
Okay, so if you go with a service, for instance, I have to trust that service. I mean, how many times do
Yeah.
we hear, accountants taking, or lawyers or agents taking their clients' money? So we have to trust the service.
Yeah, you probably have like a licensed, bonded key custodian that you trust, and you probably wouldn't just do one. It's kind of like, imagine if you were giving somebody access to your lockbox at your bank.
Right.
What you'd probably want to do is, instead of giving any one person access to it, you'd take a 3-part key and put one key in this bank, one key in that bank, and one key in that bank, and they have to put them all together to really access your safe.
Okay. So would a custodial service be decentralized?
That's a really good question. So if you use only one and you give it a weight of one, that's pretty centralized. So
Yeah.
you can choose what level of centralization or decentralization you want, in the sense that if you wanted to feel more decentralized, you could actually say, I want, 3 or 5 or 7. And you might even be able to say, I want a smart contract on a blockchain to hold part of my key, which would be more of a sophisticated mechanism. That might be one measure that, given your risk profile or your threat model, you might say, I want to go to an extremely high level of key protection. And there's higher cost associated with every additional protection you get. So it's more of saying, so what do you, with your asset portfolio, need? And what I guess is that as these systems scale and roll out, there's probably going to be a default group of like 3 or 5 or 7 that most people use. And that beyond that, it's going to be up to each individual. And really, even when in the beginning, there's probably going to be, let's say we've got Clear Technology. Clear Technology does everything right. So they're probably going to do like the escrow and the bonded agents and all of that. But so that'll probably be like maybe a 2 or 3, 4 or 5 sort of default group. But if you felt like you needed more, because the core protocol supports you defining more, you can dynamically change something that starts with 2 or 3 to add 5 or 7, or as many as you want later. So you can change the level of decentralization.
So this kind of reminds me of blockchain with the nodes validating the transaction. There's like nodes all over.
Very similar.
Yeah.
And actually, you could think of each one of these keys, these key sets. It's more like, it's actually called a key event log. You could think of it as a mini blockchain.
Right.
It's a
Right.
micro blockchain.
That's kind of like, it's kind of reminding me of that. Okay.
Yeah, you know your blockchain.
Well, yes and no. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, it's kind of cool, actually.
So to just recap the 3 different types of services or key management processes: 1, you own yourself, which is how the world does it today. 2, your contacts could help you to rebuild it. So if you basically said, I'll select 10 contacts and maybe 3 of them have to actually verify certain things, and it can come back depending on the weighting. And it could be as simple as you select the contacts and then you just select a scale on what the trust levels are. Or you could just select them and it automatically knows, hey, 3 out of 5 need to be able to validate this, and then it comes back. So you or your contacts or a service, and the service could have multiple different service providers that are custodians, fiduciarily insured as a business to manage that. So again, you or contacts or a service to be able to do the key management. I personally look at this is the future of identity, period. It's the future of asset management and asset transfer and permits and certificates or certifications and licensing. All of these different things are going to revolve around it, but it puts those keys in such a critical place that if you lose them, what options do you have? And now we're talking about 2 additional options in addition to you, contacts and then the service. So this is something that I think is missing inside the decentralized environments. And I think that it's a viable service with potential. And we would love to just kind of throw it out there for folks. Some people, it's like, well, I don't know how long I'm going to live. I don't know if there's estate planning on the other side of it. I don't know if you tie the whole services to estate planning or, I did look up earlier today, And it was actually eye-opening. It was crazy to see how many different states. I'll see if my system doesn't blow up when I try and do this. Let's see here. I'll do it this way. So what I did was I actually looked at the data around how many assets are actually uncollected or unclaimed when people pass away. Anyone want to take a guess at how much is left there or around?
10% of it, like are you saying just for Utah or just in the USA in general?
I'm talking just in, yeah, I mean, you could do Utah. Let's take what do you think the highest amount of assets that went unclaimed is in a state? I'll tell you, I'll give you a hint. The largest one is New York, and total unclaimed assets that are held within the state of New York. You ready for this number? Well, I'll give you the last 12 months. It is about $633 million in assets in 1 year that have gone unclaimed in the state of New York. Combined over the years since they've been calculating this, anybody want to take a guess? All right, 20 billion. So think about that. One state has $20 billion worth of value. California is 13 billion. Texas last year, 12 months, 422 million. New Jersey, 6 billion. Illinois, 5 billion. Iowa, 4.8 to 5 billion. Pennsylvania, 5 billion. Last year alone, $30 million in assets that went unclaimed. Massachusetts, 3 billion. Washington, 2.5 billion. Florida, 2 billion. Last year, 44 million. In Washington, it was 154 million. Georgia, 3 billion. I think you get the point that these states are basically amassing tons of unclaimed assets. I'll give you an example of what an unclaimed asset is. Kraken just basically sent to the state of Texas a ton of, when people pass away, and there's a death certificate filed for them, that ties to their social security number, which then sends out to their holders, whether they're liabilities or assets, notice. I don't know if most of you knew that that's actually happening in the world, but that when that happens and an individual passes away and assets are held, like with Kraken. So Kraken is an exchange that actually holds the keys. So in this case, instead of it being you or your contacts or a service, Kraken actually does it. If you're on Binance, if you're on Coinbase, it's the same thing. So when someone passes away, that notice goes through the systems. And if you think it goes through the systems now, wait until all of these systems basically link identity and payments and then AI on top of it. It's going to go very rapidly. So what this is doing is it's shifting the key ownership from a centralized entity like an exchange to the individual. So very important. And then what I'm trying to drive at is what happens a couple of years later is if that individual passed away, there's a death certificate, then Kraken is required to not just keep those assets in perpetuity, but they send them to the state in which they were domiciled. That's how the systems currently work. Does that make sense?
You're there, Michael. I'd like to add something to that.
Yeah, go for
If
it.
that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so even beyond someone passing away, if you take it to companies and directors and things like that, if a company is dissolved, either administratively or by choice by the directors, and they're not aware of some of those companies' assets, maybe there's been mergers, acquisitions, or anything like that, those unrealized assets also get passed to the state. And that's actually where the largest funds assets are accrued, and then trying to get them back from the state is near impossible. So, yeah, a person passing away, that would be the minority of those numbers that you've mentioned, the billions that each state are holding over time. The largest funds are companies own, stocks, all sorts of real estate, and when they merge or get acquired, a lot of that's forgotten about. Time goes on, and then even if they haven't utilized those assets for a period of time, even time itself ticks along and then can be handed over to the state just from lack of, I guess, usage on the account that is linked to those assets, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's a huge market here, and a lot of states are sitting on tens of billions of dollars worth of assets that is not being returned. So this is a huge space, and yeah, it definitely needs to be resolved. And I guess this is where it's heading. So yeah, Kraken, we wouldn't want Kraken handing it over to the state, for example. The state is notoriously difficult to get those assets back from. So if we can have other solutions to this problem, it's going to, yeah, it's a massive problem, and it certainly needs a solution.
Yeah. That one thing that's really neat about doing it within a chain environment is you have the ability to actually track or trace across chains. So you could go from Ethereum to Bitcoin to the digital world, and you could actually use forensics to actually see how they're transferred. Or let's just say it's in the digital world, it even gets easier, but the individual's identity is obfuscated. But imagine if we link an identity in the future. Let's say the current way that the systems does it based upon social security numbers, but let's say there was a law that was introduced that said a derived key. So one of these actual types of keys, let's say you could actually file taxes. What you would link your social security number to one of the derived keys and then file it. And imagine if you could actually have all of your transactions and payments and receipt, everything all done. You could literally not even have to worry about filing or the structure of doing the reporting, because the reporting is actually public. And so a lot of those types of services, whether it's forensic based or whether it's tax based, can actually already be automated. And I believe that in the digital world and the way it's heading, and a lot of this is actually snapping into place, income tax, capital gains, property tax, payroll, municipalities, any of the types of taxations that you're currently seeing in centralized systems, like with USD and others, they can basically be in a jurisdiction that if all parties, so there's usually people making money and people spending money. Those are the two use cases. So if someone's making money, and let's say someone paid them for making the money, and they're spending the money, and if all three of those parties are involved in an environment that is in a jurisdiction, that could be questioned whether there's a simple process around what it is. Now, for instance, if an American goes to New Zealand, they're still responsible for filing, even if they make income in New Zealand, they have to file in both jurisdictions and pay in one. Well, imagine if an environment similar to this, you could actually say, we understand what the assets are, we understand what the jurisdiction is, and then you could basically, based upon who you are and what your citizenship is and your responsibility, you could actually have forms automatically paid that ties to the reporting. So we've gone through the reporting, the forensics, the taxation, all of the details, but when you move into a system that has dynamic systems, which really these different layers that we started talking about, all of these different things around from identity, and I'll make it a little bit bigger for folks, from identity to the financial transactions, to storage, to communications, to assets, to governance, to reputation, and ultimately the legacy that we're talking about. How does it get passed from one generation to another generation? And how does that actually occur? Some people say, well, What if you haven't logged into a system within 45 days? It may raise a flag that sends you out a message that says, hey, are you still around? Just validate that you're alive. And the proof of life, if you select different validation processes, let's say just moving around and having your phone touch different things, maybe they're NFCs, maybe they're Bluetooth, maybe they're Wi-Fi, maybe it's who you are, maybe you're actually, doing different things, maybe it's a scale, maybe it's a ring, maybe it's a watch. But the key is it ties to data that you own, but you're validating who you are and that you're actually alive. You're validating proof of life. And so what if you are? What if you aren't? If you are, then hopefully you will have your keys, or your contacts can validate if you ever need to re-verify your keys. The times that when you would need to re-verify, let's say you're moving from one device to another device, you would basically say, hey, I want to scan my keys. So I don't know if you know this, but not only can your keys look like these words here, but there's also a QR code. See this little thing right here says show QR code. So you just grab a new device and then you scan your old one, and all your apps, all your data, it all comes back with your assets. But if you don't have the right keys, your assets may not come back. And that's really what we're talking about and contemplating here, is the importance around, if you're putting your whole life in this digital world and it's all run off of keys, how do you make sure that you can actually get your keys back? One of my questions to Kent would be, it's good that you can select the service and then say you want 3 people or 3 service providers to 5 as things maybe get more important. But what if you said, I want to be the only one that actually does my keys? I don't want contacts and I don't want a service provider. Is it viable or real where you could say, go from me to a service provider? Or do you see that does it has to be something that is selected before, or I guess in the beginning, so to speak?
Yeah, good question. You can actually start with a multi-sig group with only one participant that's just controlled by you. And so what it is at the start, you just make your identity, your main identity, be a multi-signature identity. And then that gives you the capability to later either expand the group or contract the group as necessary.
Okay. So maybe you could go from you and click a button that says, I actually want to share my key with my contacts. And so it says, select your contacts. And in one case, it might be on a ClearPhone that actually has the contacts that are using derived keys to manage it, which it's not work. That doesn't work on Apple. It could work on Android phones. And it works today on ClearPhones. But so are you envisioning something where the individual today is managing it? It pops up when they go into maybe backing up their keys, instead of them just taking a copy of it. There's another little button that pops in there that says, verify with my contacts in case I lose my keys, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I would say, do you want to create a key recovery group? And you could default by saying, here's a list of contacts on the one side, and then on the next side, you could say, here's a list of key recovery services that are in this network. So either one of those could be suggested. But yeah, it'd be pretty much when you're backing up your key to begin with, then you'd offer those alternatives.
Okay. Let me just throw it out there and just ask folks in this group, which is a very small little test group, how many of you would actually pay for a service from a service provider regarding?
I guess it depends who the service provider was.
Okay. Anybody else?
If I felt it was safe and secure, I would absolutely pay.
Okay.
For something like that.
How many of you, I'm going to go to the opposite end of the question, unless somebody else has feedback on that last question. How many of you would not use a service like this? It's like, I don't want to give any kind of keys out to third parties. I just wouldn't use it.
I I would use the service like this, Michael, but I think what I'm thinking is how does the IP intelligence tie back into this system? Like IP intelligence from a computer, like are we talking about like completely using something away from what we're using now? It's tied in, but
It's all the same.
How-
It's the same technology that's currently being used, which is called key receipt index fund. So it's basically carry. And then there's another element around what's called ACDC, which we'll continue to implement. But the existing one, I think it's Raghu. We're getting some feedback from you.
you're
bud.
cutting out. I can't hear you.
Raghu, we're getting some. There you go, bud. Thank you.
Yeah, I just muted it.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. So it's the same architecture that we currently have, but this would be an additional development on top of it to enable contacts. Okay, we'll come to you, buddy. Well, to enable contacts to be able to provide your key or your validate who you are and help rebuild your key. And then in addition to that, a service. So neither one of these exists today. Theoretically, they could. So we're trying to understand, would people use them? And if so, would people pay for them? And if not, would people be scared of them? Because I can see all three folks saying it. But Raghu.
Sorry, I had a couple calls that came in, so I'm jumping in a little late after initially signing in. I really think it has more to do with the marketing and how it's packaged, and then also the context. So, once you're tracing, once you know where people are running into issues that reflect those scenarios, at that point they'd be willing to pay. And so I think that you're not selling a feature, you're selling the package, and then you can have a variety of different price considerations. When we had talked before, I gave you the example of Microsoft, where they have the student edition, they have the home edition, they have the, small business group edition, and then they have the large business edition. And then they can, sometimes they sell an individual service separately. So I think that that's where you get into the marketing side of it. I believe that as time goes on, people recognize how critical these services are. And so once you've organized the marketing where it brings people to recognize that, you would actually be able to charge a premium price.
Okay. Great feedback. So it's how it's bundled and productized, marketed. Okay. Got it.
It's, what marketing really is translating for the public the value of what they're getting.
Yeah. Okay.
This might be a silly question, but let's say I want to do a transaction and I've lost my keys. So now I've got the multi-sig service. Now I have to rely on people seeing their messages right away. If I'm sitting there and I'm like in the middle of a transaction, but I got to wait for people to see the message that I lost my keys.
Yeah, I would think that there would be a delay, but go ahead, Kent.
That's a really good question, because that's going to happen. It's bound to happen. Any failure mode that we can think of that could happen, will happen according to Murphy's Law. Somebody will hit it. So that's a good instance where a service provider by default will likely have a default key recovery service for people. And only if a person really decides to or chooses to, would they sort of get into a situation. They could, if you give people, what it gets down to is if you give people control over their keys, there is a degree of responsibility that goes with that. And it's possible that a person that is managing their identity could get themselves into a position where it could be inconvenient to recover. One of the ways that you would make for a smooth user experience for something like this is you would give people a recommended service that says, okay, here are these 3 licensed bonded or 7 or 12 licensed bonded agencies that have this fiduciary key custodial responsibility, and they all have a third weight. So no one of them can do it independently, but you'd say, well, we'll have those as a part of your multi-signature identity, so that if you get in a bind and you need to recover, well, you can rely on them, or you can rely on your social group. Because you could totally have a mixed situation where you say, I have a social group and I want to rely on them. Or you could say, I'll also pay for, and maybe some people might do it for free or inexpensive. You might say there's this set of escrow agents that I trust. So instead of having to rely on people that are in your family, you might say, okay, I'm gonna also rely on some people who it's their business model to pay attention to user requests, so that if I get in a bind, I can get a quick response. And then of course, that's higher risk. Every person that you add to your group, it's a little bit higher risk. So you'll have to pick who you trust carefully. But that's how we would solve the problem, is with those licensed and bonded agents who would be a part of your group.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Well, so I think we've got enough data and kind of game film on understanding the thoughts and perspectives of keys and key rotations. It's the basis for what the digital world is built on. As you can see, you've literally got keys, that then the identity, that then the payments, and the combination of it. It makes you private, but at the same time, there's liability with it. So thank you so much, Kent, for your diligence in thinking through the problem and potentially coming up with solutions. We look forward to discussing this puppy in the future. One of the other big things that actually has transpired this last week is we had the digital world actually provided a response to a request for information, or an RFI, from the state of Utah. That was submitted yesterday. And I'd like to just review parts and pieces of it. This is not something that is binding or, anything that the digital world's entering into, but it's something that is contemplating a pretty material enter into. So I wanted to review that with everybody, as a portion of this is basically taking some of the software, majority of it, the systems, the front ends, all of that, and basically enabling it in an open source way, depending on how the actual state would respond. So I'm going to go ahead and read this to you, and we'll go through this real fast.
Digital World, Global Digital Privacy Framework Response to the State-Endorsed Digital Identity, CDRFI, submitted by the Digital World Councils in collaboration with Clear Foundation and the Clear Companies. Digital World Global Framework, date, October 6, 2025, to State of Utah Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, GovOps, subject, Digital World, Global Digital Privacy Framework Response to the CDRFI. Dear Review Committee, the Digital World Councils, in collaboration with Clear Foundation and the Clear Companies, are honored to submit Digital World, Global Digital Privacy Framework Response to the CDRFI. We affirm our complete support for the state of Utah, the CD program, and the technical direction guided by Sam Smith and the CARI framework. Utah stands as the first jurisdiction in the world to pioneer a fully privacy-preserving digital identity architecture capable of scaling from local governance to global recognition. We believe Utah's approach, combined with the Digital World Framework, provides the blueprint for ethical digital governance worldwide. Open source stewardship framework. The Digital World Councils have adopted the same stewardship model to ensure transparency, accountability, and security. 1. Open protocols and standards. All decentralized identity specifications, CARI, ACDC, OIT4VC, SDJWT, remain open source under Apache 2.0 or equivalent, supporting public verification and interoperability across nations. 2. Reference implementations with clear public license. The Digital World Governance Suite, Council voting, legislation portal, Treasury interface, will be released under the Clear Public License, CPL, for non-commercial and governmental use. 3. Core custody and network integrity key servers and validator frameworks will remain under Digital World custodial oversight to prevent impersonation or fragmentation of the global identity registry. 4. Brand and certification protection. The marks Digital World, D-Verified, and associated reputation systems remain trademarked to ensure authentic certification across all jurisdictions. 5. A global path forward Utah CD specification will serve as the foundational jurisdictional reference for worldwide adoption. Once implemented, the framework will be fully open sourced so other states and nations may harmonize under Utah's leadership. Through this partnership, Utah becomes the cornerstone of a decentralized global standard, verifiable, lawful, and privacy-preserving. Together, the Digital World Councils, Clear Foundation, and the state of Utah can set a precedent that honors freedom, stewardship, and responsibility in the digital era. With deepest respect, the Digital World Councils, via Clear Foundation.
So that's basically a letter that started it. Does anybody have any questions on what that is? If not, I'll go ahead and go through the quick response. We'll go down to this point right here.
Executive summary. The Digital World is a global privacy-first governance framework built on open standards and decentralized technologies that respect human sovereignty and local jurisdiction. This white paper responds to the state of Utah CDRFI by proposing a model of interoperability and lawful global recognition, where Utah CD implementation, Utah Live, becomes the first recognized digital jurisdiction within the Digital World's governance structure. This partnership would make Utah the pioneer state in establishing a privacy-anchored, open-source identity system compatible with international digital standards, while protecting individual data, family governance, and the constitutional principles of self-determination. 1. Introduction. Why global interoperability matters. The Digital World exists to ensure that no government, corporation, corporation, or organization can monopolize identity or control the digital lives of humanity. Utah's leadership in the DAO Act, Digital Choice Act, and GOLD Act has already created a legal foundation for digital self-ownership. The Digital World Framework extends that foundation internationally, providing Utah with global interoperability, digital treaty recognition, and a trusted model for other states and nations to follow. The core idea is simple. The individual should own their digital identity, data, and assets, not the system. 2. Legislative and governance alignment. The digital world's governance model mirrors Utah's decentralization philosophy. Its legislative corpus is drafted and ratified through open digital councils. Each council represents a sphere of human and digital activity, governance, services, infrastructure, finance, and stewardship. Approved legislation. Digital Rights Charter guarantees freedom of expression, access to information, and digital identity protection. Open source mandate ensures transparency by requiring all core technologies to remain open source. Council voting protocol defines democratic, transparent voting across decentralized councils. Key draft legislation. Digital Privacy and Human Rights Act. Law codifies personal data sovereignty and privacy as fundamental human rights. Digital World Data Freedom Act. Draft prevents central entities from owning, mining, or reselling personal data. Digital World Trust Framework. Draft governs identity issuance, credential revocation, and reputation management. Digital World Treasury AI Framework. Draft defines ethical use and transparency standards for AI in identity and finance. Each act within the digital world legislative corpus parallels Utah's statutory innovation, forming a bridge between state authority and digital self-governance. 3. The Declaration of Unity Philosophical Foundation. Life, love, family, community, choice. The Digital World Declaration of Unity asserts that all individuals possess inherent responsibilities to self, family, and community, not merely rights granted by institutions. It calls for decentralization of power, down to the level of families and communities, reinforcing legitimacy through virtue, accountability, and stewardship rather than coercion or surveillance. These values align perfectly with Utah's historical and legislative ethos. Virtue and individual accountability. Family is the foundation of governance. Responsibility over entitlement. Stewardship over ownership. By embedding these principles in technology, Utah and the digital world share a common mission to restore freedom and balance in the digital age.
So it goes through the different elements that we've talked about: identity, credentials, protocols, and disclosures and security. Majority of this ties to the digital world legislation process that we've already talked about and how that basically relates with other environments. The goal was to help the state of Utah understand that there's a jurisdiction that they can actually link to that is global, and they don't have to worry about all of because it's very difficult for bodies that may be looking for that kind of guidance. For instance, the states usually look to the federal government in the United States of America. I know most of the people on this call are not from the United States, but the key is how can Utah rely on a global standard that it can actually count on that may not feel foreign? For instance, some of the laws and acts that are already in place or in legislation process, they are already following things that are already consistent within the physical world, but it creates an environment where we can actually all agree within the digital world to choose to be a part of it. The key is people have choice. So this actually talks a little bit about that. I'll go ahead and read this.
8. Utah is the founding jurisdiction of the digital world in the U.S. Utah can become the first recognized jurisdiction within the digital world, defining a model that other U.S. states can replicate. Benefits: global recognition. Utah citizens' credentials recognized across borders. Open source collaboration. Shared code base maintained by digital world developers and Utah technologists. Innovation leadership. Utah becomes the Geneva of digital identity governance. Sovereignty preservation. Utah maintains complete control over data, law, and issuance. This partnership would establish Utah as the lawful and moral leader in decentralized governance for the 21st century.
So a pretty big topic, massive. Open source treasury. So this isn't that it manages the treasury, but it has the software that actually can connect into doing transactions on the digital world chain that connects to the digital world treasury would actually be open source and standard for the world. So that means that more people would be using it. Now, could they link it to other chains and do other things? That's still, people can, in that kind of think about a GPL2 or Apache 2 type license, which is similar to what we're really talking about. They could do that. The copyright and the code itself, would basically have attribution, but it's still, they can do what they want to with it. So we'll go ahead and just read this closing portion of it so you kind of understand what was sent in.
10. Offer of global partnership. The Digital World Councils formally offer to collaborate with the state of Utah to integrate Utah Life as the inaugural CD-compatible implementation within the Digital World Network, provide global recognition and certification for Utah-issued verifiable credentials, support open source governance, technical documentation, and transparency standards, create a global interoperability treaty allowing other states and nations to adopt Utah's model. This partnership ensures Utah remains at the epicenter of the world's transition to secure, human-centric digital identity. 11. Vision. The decentralized future of humanity. The digital world envisions a unified ecosystem where every human owns their digital identity, every community governs itself locally, yet interconnects globally. Data is sacred and never weaponized. Technology serves virtue, accountability, and stewardship. Utah's adoption of CD through the Utah Life Framework would mark the first real world realization of this vision, a peaceful bridge between local sovereignty and global interoperability.
Pretty big stuff. Any thoughts or comments or feedback on what you've observed, or concerns or observations or whatever? Anything? I think that what we just saw is a pretty, it's a huge conversation, and super grateful for the state of Utah being open-minded and at least willing to entertain such dialogue.
I think it might be worth mentioning that there's a SETI summit next week on Friday for anybody that wants to go.
Yeah, this is actually a link to it. So if you'd like to go, I'll go ahead and drop this link internally and externally, and you can register for it 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Utah Valley University, which is the same place that there was a shooting with Mr. Charlie Kirk. Different, I won't even get into that, but it is just down the street. So I'll go ahead and post this live for everybody here, there. Thoughts, comments on what you observed?
I definitely have some thoughts and comments, but I'd love to hear from other people first because I've already spoken today.
Michael, I just really would like to know your thoughts on when do you think retail service providers are going to be able to identify this as kind of like the next big thing for them? I mean, I see this being a huge solution for a lot of our problems that we have. I don't know if anyone you've spoken to from any of the, the major retail service providers and telecommunications are on board, or are they not on board? Who are they? Do they want to collaborate? How can we come together? That's kind of what's on my mind at the moment.
That's a really good question and observation. And as Raghu, who's on this call, taught and understands very well, it's not a matter of who's president or who you vote for. It's a matter of what you purchase, if you purchase local, etc., and if what you use to purchase. And so to answer your question directly, within the Utah environment, these are partners that are involved in one form or another in potentially transacting.
That answers my question.
Yeah. So these are different, and some of them, clear companies, different stages, different, different political folks, different financial folks. So these are current ones that are basically already involved in some form or another. So, but your question is very, very intelligent, because that is where the rubber meets the road, is adoption and utilization. And here, one way or another, I believe that within the next decade, we're going to go from 6% of people having exposure to decentralized or cryptographic-based assets to, I believe, over 50%. And you will see assets and people and transactions that will move to the system. The question is, will it be centralized, truly centralized? And that's what the Digital World Framework really enables, is an alternative to the centralized systems with true decentralization. Or, will they basically just be sucked into kind of like what's happening in the UK right now, where if you don't get a digital ID, you don't get the opportunity to work. Or in Vietnam, where if you don't get a digital ID, they just take your bank account until you get it. Or in Nigeria, where if you don't get a digital ID and link it to an app on your phone, you basically get your cell phone number turned off. And I think these are just the start of a lot of these things that are going to actually transpire. I'll play a video real fast for a gentleman here on, I don't know if you can see this gentleman here.
The UK recently completed a carbon credit system trial that sets a daily allowance for each person, a literal cap on your ability to travel, purchase food, clothing, and even heat your home, all rationed under the guise of saving the planet. Your daily carbon limit is capped at 40 kilograms of CO2, with food restricted to just 4 kilograms. So how does this translate to actual food? Well, according to the report, a packet of cheese accounts for 1.1 kilograms of CO2, over 25% of your daily allowance. Red meat? Forget it. If you spent your entire 4 kg allowance on steak, you'd get around 8 ounces of meat. While meat and dairy products have the highest carbon footprints, 2 slices of bread would account for just 3%, while a can of Coke just 4%. So basically, diabetes is on the menu. But don't worry, Big Pharma will have you covered because medications and healthcare products will not be factored into your daily carbon limit. But here's where things get terrifying. They're not just suggesting it, they're testing it. Food manufacturers are already slapping carbon labels on their products. And let's not forget the food supply chain either. These policies directly threaten local farmers and producers as red meat gets penalized heavily, while synthetic lab-grown meat is being propped up as a solution. The fashion industry contributes approximately 10% of global carbon emissions, with much of the impact coming from production and transportation, which is now your problem. A single cotton t-shirt will cost you 2.1 kilograms of CO2. Synthetics will cost you much more. And if you like leather, just buy it now. But you can save those carbon credits by purchasing used clothes. So how about travel? The average person burns through 2.3 kg per day going about their daily lives. However, if you ever see yourself going on vacation again, you're going to want to start biking or walking to work because a typical round trip via airplane from London to New York emits approximately 1,600 kilograms of CO2 per person, equating to 80 days of your total carbon allowance under the PCA guidelines. Heating accounts for a significant share of household emissions, especially in colder climates, with the average household burning through 6 kg of CO2 per day. The recommended solution? Be cold, or fork over a bunch of money to install renewable energy sources in your home. There's also an allowance for leisure and entertainment. Streaming services, gaming, or internet usage at home or on your phone relies on data centers powered by electricity. So that will cost you. Going to a concert or a ball game? Well, that involves travel, lighting, and heating or cooling. Boom, pay the toll. You like gardening, DIY projects, or recreational sports? Those all involve resource consumption, and there's no free lunch in the credit carbon world. Now, you might be thinking, surely this is just a trial. Wrong. This isn't just being tested, it's being planned. In the UK white paper, they openly admit that their goal is to encourage behavior towards implementing the system. They're normalizing the idea that your lifestyle is subject to bureaucratic quotas handed down by governments that live in luxury while telling you to eat less meat. Surprisingly, here's where it gets dystopian. The system isn't about reducing emissions where it matters. The report itself acknowledges that 70% of carbon emissions come from sectors beyond individual control, including industry, exports, and military operations. But instead of tackling those, they're coming after you. You see, this isn't about reducing carbon, it's about reducing you, restricting how far you can travel, what you can eat, and ultimately, the UK recently.
So I think some of this stuff, is fear factor based, but I do believe that there's a lot of truth to some of the things they're talking about with the potential of what's coming. Will it be this harsh? Will it be this difficult? I think that people will stand up for what they believe. And just like what you're seeing over in the UK, 100,000 signatures are being collected every day in a petition against no digital ID. The sad thing is what he's talking about is actually happening. Do I think it's going to happen as deep as he's talking about? Hopefully not. Hopefully it doesn't even come close to that, but that's a reality. And when we talk about a lot of these other systems, it's really inevitable when people basically lose their identity or they're in a centralized system, then the payments are inside of it, which, by the way, Real ID is actually delivered from a company in France where their core business is actually payments. And, we've talked about this before, and it's actually layered on a blockchain. And then when you layer AI on top of that, everything. And I think if you've used AI, you understand the power of AI in being able to look at a large data set and be able to decipher anything you want to from it. So do I think the world's going to turn out the way this guy's talking about it? I think in some ways it's going to be worse. In some ways it's probably not even going to come close to it. But it does go to paint the picture around, we need to be thinking about things and finding an alternative path. And that's really what we're all contemplating here. So thoughts or comments before I move to the next topic?
I will say I'm very grateful that we're leading the world here in Utah on how to do things in a privacy and humanity respecting way, because we need something different. And it makes me very grateful and happy inside to know that in the pioneer state with people that had to give up everything to come here to start something so that they could be free, it's the place where we get to lead the world from. And it's a big responsibility for us, and I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that this is done right, as I know you are, Michael. But I'm really glad that it's us that gets to be this voice.
Amen. Amen to that. And it was an honor meeting you last week. And I absolutely know that we're all fellow travelers. And if anything, there's a baton that I think will be passed your direction that will help to leverage. You know, this is 16 years worth of work, but when you take that and push it to folks that actually can do other things with it, I think that it can magnify it in a very beautiful way. So appreciate your comment and the opportunity to get to know you and to build with you. Other comments or feedback?
Hey, Michael, I just have one suggestion, and I've been experiencing with other apps from Web3, and I know there's like many layers to this. And something that I discovered, which might be useful, is like when you actually download one of these chain apps, there is an option for you to kind of like learn to earn. So that might be something that, I don't know if you've got that idea, but it could be just when someone downloads the app, they could be, you could go through the app and you ask questions, do a little poll to make sure they understand what the app's about, and then give them some incentives, credits or something, how to use the app.
Super feedback. Yeah, that's really actually wise. Yeah. You're gonna pay for user adoption and user education, whether it's through the support process or the education process, and it's always better in the education side of it. And rewarding people for learning is good as well. So good feedback. Really good feedback. Well, next topic is going to be just a general update around the things that have happened within the week. And then after that, Adam, if you want to be ready to go through digital and the different thoughts and directions as we prepare to really stand that up, that would be valuable. I don't know if you're hearing that. That sounds
Yeah, I can go through that. I just got my battery in my phone because I'm out and about. It's
You're about to
got
die
about
now?
30%. Whenever you're ready.
If you want to go first, you're welcome to it. Do you want me to pull that up right now and you can start, and then I'll go through the other stuff later?
Yeah.
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah, ready to go.
Okay, so this is one example. I'm not saying that this is the case, but these are all 10 different options that could go into digital. Actually, I won't even say anything. Adam, I'll go ahead and let you describe what this is that we're looking at. So, and the importance of why and how. Adam?
You ready for me to go there, Michael?
Yeah, man, it's all you.
Okay, so yeah, the digital is coming along really, really nicely with the ecosystem that Michael's creating. You can see that if you just run your eye down, you've got various different asset classes. Obviously, the Clear ecosystem, the REITs, which is real estate investment trusts, really important for what we're doing. You've got the life bond there, which is insurance payouts on life insurance policies, etc. So it's really coming together very, very nicely with everything that's been created in the ecosystem. And of course, the old tried and proven, for thousands of years, gold, silver, etc. A bit of crypto with Bitcoin in there. So what we're creating is a diversified portfolio that protects everyone's wealth against the erosion of inflation. Obviously, gold and silver have done that for all of time. Bitcoin is yet to be seen, but I think that's going to be performing pretty well over time. So we've included a bit of that in there, but also reflects the ecosystem that we're building. So we're creating a digital reserve that interacts with the ecosystem, can be used within the ecosystem, and also mirrors what is happening within the ecosystem. And all of it's redeemable, 100% backed, and protects against the erosion that is going to be the Achilles heel of the US dollar and other fiat currencies, etc. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. pretty excited to get that under the way. We've got the asset classes ready to go. Michael's been working really hard on bringing the ecosystem together and then having the coin reflect that. So that's where we're at. Fire away with any questions. Yeah.
This is exciting and very, very important for humanity and stability. But do you guys understand what you're seeing and hearing and being exposed
Yeah,
to?
I can see how that ties in with the stable currency. So that makes total sense to me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or comments?
I can carry on a little bit. Just thought I'd pause there and see if there's any feedback on it. All right. So there's a couple of more key, I guess, components and concepts. If you take a currency that's just backed by gold, for instance, and this is why we're diversifying the way that we are. If you took a currency that's just backed by gold, obviously the gold price can be suppressed, the gold price can be inflated. So it would mean that the digital world would be at the whim of what happens with the gold price in US dollars. And of course, we don't want to be at the whim of everything that's happening with those manipulating prices in the market. So it's key to have a cross-pollination of market, be it bonds, real estate, which is always a all-time favorite, gold, all-time favorite, but also adopting some new measures like Bitcoin with cryptocurrency. This adds to the liquidity. So we have a US dollar component, a Bitcoin component, which enables easy flow through liquidity. Again, the Bitcoin side of it will help protect against some inflation that the US dollar will experience. But cross-pollination of asset classes means the world that we're currently in and moving through to the digital world won't be able to manipulate what happens in the digital world. And that's very, very important when you're looking at a reserve currency for everything that we're standing up. And it future-proofs it, and we're aiming to have it future-proofed for a millennium. So, and this is the way to do it. It literally can't be manipulated. The other part of it is dilution. So all of the aspects of the digital coin is redeemable. If anyone does redeem their coin, we burn the digital. So there's no dilution effect. The asset gets delivered. So there's no issues with liquidity there. We're not requiring a counterparty to have to buy in order to liquidate. That's not required because it's 100% backed. It's literally just redeem the asset for those requesting it, burn the coin that's being redeemed, and therefore there's no dilution to the rest of the holders that are holding the digital coin. So what we're creating here ticks every single box. The price is always maintained across the board at the backed asset values, which is on chain, recorded, verified. I think every 15 minutes, and so we're creating this future-proof reserve currency so that the environment can always move forward, always improving in value and holding everybody's wealth, but also improving everybody's wealth that is holding this reserve currency. Any questions around that? I know it's a huge download, but we've worked very long and hard to sort out every measure that needs to be protected. How did the systems get manipulated? Mitigate those problems. Find those solutions. We've got it all here, and this is it hasn't been done before in a reserve currency, but it has been done before and tried and tested and proven over time in financial crises and private treasuries. So it's a tried and proven method of getting through crises, preserving wealth, but also increasing wealth and reserves through crises and beyond, on the other side of a crisis and ongoing. So it has been proven. It's got an excellent track record. And now we're doing it, putting it into an actual reserve currency. All the methods that have been tested through multiple crises over the last couple of decades. Any questions? Open to it? Open to the floor?
Thank you for all of your hard work and putting this together and all of the details and just getting ready for what's coming, so to speak. You know, this is an individual you may not recognize or know him, but he's actually built not one treasury, not two, but three different treasuries. And we're talking into the billions, and we're talking when the global financial crisis hit in 2007 and 2008, his treasuries actually did so well that the folks in the financial systems couldn't understand. And it's really following these disciplined approaches when it comes to asset management and diversification, and then discipline to stick with it as well, and making sure that you're not doing unwise trades and transactions with things that could put things in jeopardy. So I'm grateful for his leadership and guidance and desire to see something and then go and make it happen. So thank you, Adam. Appreciate you.
You're most welcome.
There has been some advancements on the digital world as far as different assets and systems. But what I'll do is I'll just walk you through the last week worth of really just photos, because they do a good job of kind of telling it. Scott Stornetta, this last week, I've met with him 3 different times. He's actually the individual that is within, for those that are not aware, this is the Bitcoin white paper. And, you know, a lot of people think it's this Satoshi that basically is the title of it. But when you look at really the details around how a lot of this stuff happens, he's the only one that's mentioned 3 different times. And he was actually involved in the submission around information to the state, not necessarily with the digital world, but as it related to the clear companies. And so we actually submitted this in addition to the other document, and we're grateful for his involvement to be able to actually bring some of the work and the things that he's brought to it. He personally actually modified this agreement, and some of the things that we'll be working with him on are around the verification side of things. For those of you that may not understand what the verification side of things are, I'll run through that real quick. This is also a slide deck that we're basically working with the state of Utah on the state endorsed digital identity. It's in a draft form, but you can kind of see how it's coming together, particularly around 2 use cases, one for grandparents and one for children, and how guardianship basically ties into those worlds. So one environment is, you know, you have an interface where you would manage assets for a grandparent, and then you would also manage assets for a child. So as a parent, you basically are given the tools to really be a good guardian, but at the same time use the power of technology to help enable the individual and their realities. So this is an interface that dissects, you know, contacts, similar to what we were talking about with the key management, but this is around payments. And then this also manages bank accounts and linked assets and even assets that you actually control. This ties into certifications from adoptions to life, to death, to marriage, to birth. This ties into assets, so you can actually see a real-time picture, and things can be drag and dropped into other classes. This is basically the assets that you would hold within a particular wallet. You can actually have multiple different wallets within this Life app. This goes through an example of how you would actually scan with a scanning process within the Life app to create a derived key and then pass it from one individual to another. The other individual agrees, then you pass it to an officiary, you schedule a time, go online, get married. The county that I'm sitting in has done over 106,000 digital cryptographic marriages, just like what I'm talking about, and literally putting many millions of dollars to the bottom line for the county. But what's unique about it is they understand identity and really the future of that. These are licenses, whether automobile license, boat, motorcycle, etc. This ties to professional licenses, business licenses, all different kinds. Locksmith, you know, metal detector, precious metal dealer, tons of different types of recreational licenses, facility licenses, permits, whether they're building permits or land use, septic zones, etc., fireworks, blasting, environmental permits, vehicle and transportation around registration or license plates or boats or ATVs or others, and then animals, and this week we're actually going to spend some time not going from Utah County, but down to Beaver County, as they're looking at actually enabling tracking every living thing, which we'll talk a little bit about right here, around not just if it's sprouted or birthed or hatched, but particularly starting with sheep, as we've got the butchers, the slaughterhouses, the farmers, the counties all together to be able to start this process where supply chain can actually be managed in such a way where the value of the product or the asset goes up because transparency has actually enabled it. I'll give you an example. If someone can see where a sheep was, what its progenitors or parents were, where it was raised, what it was fed, if it had hormones or antibiotics or vaccinations, and then how it was killed, could actually help to certify that in such a way, like from a halal standpoint, where it's double the value in certain parts of the world. So it's not just a matter of being disorganized and dysfunctional, but along the way, the butcher can actually pay the farmer, let's say a 20% deposit as first right of refusal for it. And then everybody wins. The farmer actually gets funded. The butcher has supply chain and deal flow that's coming, or I guess inventory. It's kind of weird to talk about something's life as inventory, but anyways, the health of the animal, the pedigree chart, the timeline, all of these things are really, really important, and just lots of other stuff. So I won't keep going into that, but we've made a lot of advancements as it relates to really the state of Utah, the LIFE project. This was also submitted, which is actually the Universal Genealogical Standard, which was created in 2018 by these wonderful gentlemen here and ladies. And, this is actually a standard that helped us to create what Utah LIFE and all these other jurisdictions are basically enabling within the digital world based around these types of requirements. So, you know me, I can talk a lot, but we're already over time. But any thoughts or comments or feedback that you want to go through?
Yeah, I want to ask Michael, is there an advantage of downloading one LIFE app over another?
It basically comes to the assets that are pre-installed and a standard within that jurisdiction. And sometimes it may be a language. Sometimes it may be, it has
Currency for sure.
Yeah. Currency is for sure, but it has access to different systems. So, for instance, in Nigeria, in Ethiopia versus Mexico versus Canada versus Fiji versus Tuvalu, they all have different. They don't have like what all the different certifications and permits and registrations. But they would have a base currency and a base language, and that's really the differences. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. So I'm assuming, correctly or not, that Utah LIFE is the most comprehensive?
It is
As far
today.
as-
Yeah. It has more permits and certifications and licensing than any other system globally today. The digital world has more as far as quantity, but not the depth that Utah currently has. So we're putting a lot of effort within the Utah environment, and we're doing our best to follow the existing Utah protocol or policies that they may have. These are unions on Apple. These are regions on Apple. And where there's two different buttons here, that means they've got the system that actually interfaces with the chains, as well as the app is all built. So these are different regions and countries. These are different states. And so this is the Utah one. And then on Android, very simple, on Clear. And you also see there's actually some in development where we're linking the LIFE app and the Pay app together within the Clear environment right now. So that's currently in development. And there might be a little surprise in there too, but I won't go through it until it's actually done. So, But does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Some of the other things that went through this last week, there's some additional regions within the African environment that I believe there are individuals that are getting involved that really understand the big picture. The model around the stack, so to speak, so the different environments that are coming together, the maturity around the actual systems. This goes through Clear Life and how it's actually being used by other parts of the world. This goes through just basically the keys and the rotation. This is actually the butcher that runs a business that's 47 years old, and I believe supplying a large chunk of the meat to Utah. It's actually pretty amazing how much, but this gentleman's willing to actually do a digital transaction and actually engage the farmers early on. It's really neat to see. This is actually some advancements around native. So I know yesterday for the first time it actually hit over $1, which is another interesting topic. And just wonderful people that are involved. For those that may not be aware, this is Michael Simpson. He's been a coach of the Clear companies and even prior company Direct Point since 2005. We basically all go and do a team meeting with all the department heads, usually around November timeframe, and it locks the goal, one goal for all entities, everybody involved for the next year. So it helps to really focus. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. And again, since 2005, he's been working on that. This is actually a gentleman that I believe, if you haven't seen the movie The Chosen, he's the one that built the app behind it. It did $116 million in transactions and raises and donations and tickets and sales and just wonderful things. And this is actually on the new digital ranch, which we'll be talking a lot more about, which actually ties to the REIT, which actually ties to digital, which today we actually signed an agreement for Clear Properties to start standing up what we will call the Digital World Resorts. And we look forward to spending more time and digging into the details. This is actually a stage of one of them. There'll actually be a Marriott built just 50 to 150 feet from there. Yeah, so this is actually one of the stores there and some wonderful people. Actually, Kent's on the call. By the way, Kent, I didn't get one of these, so I'd love to figure that out and how to integrate it and follow up with the gentleman behind that. This is actually, instead of scanning, I believe that we can actually do some ordering and paying within the actual system just by using NFC or near field communication on the phones. This is a key meeting last week. This is actually what I was talking about with Kent, and just some memories that are important. This was actually this is Scott Stonera, the gentleman who is actually on the Bitcoin white paper, and we're going through Utah identity, as well as this last week. We had dinner with his wife and my wife, and actually going through really the life as well as the life paper, which we look forward to spending a little bit more in-depth dialogue around Bitcoin with proof of work and Lifecoin with proof of life, and his perspective and really the world's adoption of it. Yeah, so just a lot of different moving parts. Most of you are already familiar with them. These are the stack or the layers. With that being said, we'll go ahead and prepare to wrap up today. This is actually some of the butchers, like you wouldn't think, but this is basically represents 3 different locations. And when we talk about some of the carbon credits and scores and fake meat and all the pressures on farmers, I really believe that if we can gain alignment within the food production world, how it's created and delivered. Like Ragu's on this call, and he's forgotten more about that type of thing and economics around how that works than most people have even learned. But these farmers and these butchers will actually make a real difference. So this was an event that they had, just amazing stuff. I look forward to seeing Africa and some of the continued involvement there, as well as some of the things that are happening in the Arabian Union as well. And we're grateful for what the state of Utah is doing. I really believe that will create a compelling event for other states that really may not have the resources or the fortitude or the depth to understand the importance of their role to really give the individual their own identity and data, and to then validate and endorse that. That's a really big deal. We're grateful for all those team members that are just tirelessly there and work hard, that may be behind the scenes and just every single day push to make things better and different. So that's Scott. This is actually talking a little bit about how the Clear Foundation will do a demo within that environment. So yeah, there's some wonderful, wonderful advancements this last week. So we're grateful for those that are actually listening to this report out and taking the time. We'll go ahead and maybe take any kind of last question that there may be, and then prepare to wrap up with a prayer for if anyone wants to volunteer and go ahead and do that. You're welcome to it. So thoughts or comments or questions or concerns or direction as we wrap up today's meeting? We got a quiet crew, huh? Does anybody want to offer the closing prayer? Okay, I'll go ahead and offer it. Our dear Heavenly Father, we come before thee this day and give thanks for guidance and understanding, and for the opportunity to be here on earth, and to have minds and healthy minds, and to have eyes that can see, and to understand the concepts and the simple truths that we've been given, the simple things of life, even those that create life from a seed, and that we can understand that our role, as simple as it may be, to be able to be stewards over those lives, whether it's physical life or lives that we've been given the charge to be able to be in charge of, but to really be servants of. We ask that our hearts may be aligned, whether it's children, family members here, as we all are family, or if it's with thee. I'm grateful for the dispensation that we have the opportunity to live in, to be able to connect like we are, to be able to understand the truth and error, and the responsibility that we have that comes with some of these gifts of advancements. And as we do our part, that future generations may be able to be protected and also to become better. We're grateful for the ability to choose and to learn and to grow, and even to repent of things that we may have shortcomings on. We ask that we may be guided and led as we go through our individual days, and collectively as we come together here, that we may understand truth and error, that we may be able to individually discern and collectively make the right choices for future generations. We ask that the things that we're touching on, that we may individually and collectively have guidance and fortitude, and even be able to see things that may not be right, or focus on things and have alignment of things that may be thy will. We're grateful for the knowledge that we're spirits, and we have these amazing bodies that we get to run around this amazing earth in. And we say these things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. Thank you for all of your time and your attention, for the consistency for so many. And we'll see you next week, Tuesday at 6:00 p.m. Mountain Time. Bye, everybody.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha. Bye.
Kia ora.